Greetings to all viewers. Today's story turned out to be very loud and made a lot of noise. Let's examine all the circumstances of the case. Human cruelty sometimes exceeds all imaginable limits. The heroine of our today's story died painfully in fire. The saddest thing is that all this happened because of a close person who betrayed her. Kimberly Tanaka was born in 1974 in New York, USA, and was the only child in the family. Her father's name was Thomas. The man was a large, successful businessman. The head of the family dealt with real estate in the early stages of business development. But later, when his daughter was born, he started working with computers. This direction was very promising. The family had more than enough money, and the loving father readily used it to fulfill every whim of his child. After some time, the parents divorced, and the child remained living with her mother. During this period, she was only 1 year old. The girl communicated with her father only on weekends. Thomas greatly valued these brief moments when he could take his daughter with him and spend free time with her. Several years later, the girl's mother decided to move to Florida. She found a new man and was planning to build a family with him. During this period, the mother gave the girl the opportunity to choose who she wanted to stay with. Kimberly decided not to leave New York, where she grew up. Thus, the daughter began living with her father, with whom they became truly close. The daughter even jokingly asked her father not to marry again so that there would not be any negative changes in their relationship. When Kimberly was 20 years old, she was studying at Staunton-Allenda College. She was known as a bright and kind young beauty. She was very fun to be around. She was open and sociable, even a bit naive. Parents surrounded her with their care throughout childhood, literally not allowing her to struggle with difficulties, solving everything for her with their own efforts. The dark side of the world and people, all kinds of problems bypassed the young beauty. Thanks to this, she had an open heart. In 1994, the girl wanted to move to her own apartment and live alone. She asked her father about this, and the man was initially against it. He was very worried about his daughter's safety, but at the same time understood that she needed to become independent and build her life. The daughter was already 20 years old. He still cared, and was very afraid for her. But he didn't want to upset the girl, so he agreed anyway. Later, they went to the city to look for suitable housing. For safety reasons, the man chose an apartment for her that was located in a safe area of the city. Almost immediately after moving, he also bought her a spot in the garage across the street so she could park her car. To maintain communication, her father gave her a cell phone. It should be noted that we are talking about events that occurred in the mid-90s, before the advent of modern mobile phones and active development of messengers. Mobile phones of that time looked different and did not have the functionality they have now. But most importantly, at that time they had the ability to maintain contact with loved ones at any time. Even computers were not so widespread at that time, so getting a cell phone was not easy and very expensive. This speaks to the degree of care and desire to protect his daughter that Thomas tried his best to achieve. He even bought Kimberly Leschin a puppy, assuming that his daughter would feel safer with it, and later the dog would grow up and be able to protect the girl. The father really had reasons to worry. He had protected his daughter for many years, and had witnessed her unfortunate choice of guys who hurt her multiple times. The man wanted to make sure she would be safe, not suspecting what severe trial life was preparing for her. Thomas worried about Kimberly Leschin, and repeatedly told his daughter that he wanted her to return and live with him. He also offered her a job in the family business, but she refused because she wanted to find her own path in life. Nevertheless, the father never pressured his daughter and wanted to give her freedom of choice. During this period, Kimberly Leschin lived a typical student life with parties and entertainment, and the desire to be free without parental supervision. She recently got a part-time job as an accountant in an office, but the people she trusted turned out to be real traitors. Unfortunately, she had no idea what cruel outcome awaited her. On February 28, 1995, Kim went to another party. Usually she went to such events with her friend Lise, and here the girls danced and had fun. The next day, March 1st, Kimberly Leschin was supposed to go to work, but colleagues noticed her absence. They began to worry, and eventually, Kimberly Leschin's supervisor called the employee's father. There were assumptions that she was just sick and couldn't contact the office. Unfortunately, instead of confirming that his daughter was home, Thomas began to panic. He also hadn't received any news from her since the night of February 28th. The man tried to contact his daughter, but she didn't answer. he contacted all of the girl's friends whom he knew. However, no one had seen her after she left the party early morning on March 1st. The worried father decided not to wait and immediately contacted the police. But, unfortunately, here he received a standard response. Law enforcement officers noted that it was about a young girl who disappeared after a party. She was already an adult and could do whatever she wanted by law. Perhaps she stayed with friends and would return later. For her to be considered missing, at least 24 hours had to pass. Of course, such an answer did not satisfy Thomas. Therefore, he organized his own search group, which included his daughter's friends. First of all, they went to the parking lot near Kimberly's apartment. Everything looked as if she hadn't returned from the party. Her parking spot was empty, without the 1994 Honda Accord that her father had given her. She wasn't in the apartment either. With this information, the man returned to the police station again, insisting that something had happened to his daughter. However, the police officers were adamant, so Thomas continued his own investigation and visited different places where Kimberly might be and talked to many people. He paid special attention to police officers, trying to get law enforcement involved in what was happening, until he finally met a detective who became interested in the mysterious disappearance of the businessman's daughter. Like Thomas, he immediately had a feeling that something was wrong with this case. Despite the protocol, he said that action needed to be taken immediately, and personally decided to help the father of the missing girl. First, the investigator had to rule out all possible scenarios. For this, it was necessary to dismiss the version of running away from home. The detective analyzed the girl's bank card transactions. It turned out the missing person hadn't used it since the evening before her disappearance. The investigator called all of the missing girl's friends, but no one had seen her after her disappearance, and no one knew where she was. Next, the police officer began to establish the girl's schedule from the previous day to determine what she had been doing. Perhaps there were some clues here. It was quickly established that on the morning before the disappearance on February 28th, Kimberly attended college classes as usual. After the end of the school day, the student went to her work. After working for several hours, she contacted her friend named Lee Space. The girls always went to parties together. Together they went to a party where they had fun and drank a little. And around 4 o'clock in the morning, they decided it was time to leave. After this, they traveled together in Kimberly's car to Liss's house, which was literally a few blocks from Kimberly's apartment. Liss went home, and the missing girl drove to her place. Her friend never saw her again. Thus, it became known that the girl was driving her car while intoxicated. Despite this, it was important to understand what happened to Kimberly after she dropped off Liss and headed to her parking spot. Where could she have gone? For this, the police officer went to the missing person's house. Looking over the garage area, the detective tried to find any traces or marks that could help reconstruct the events of that morning when Kimberly disappeared. The only thing the investigator managed to find was a gold earring. The father confirmed that this was his daughter's jewelry. When it was shown to Lise, the friend confirmed that Kimberly was wearing such earrings at the party. There were no signs of struggle or tire marks from when a driver suddenly accelerates or stops. It seemed the car was calmly taken away, but the found earring caused concern. The detectives suspected that this was how a robber decided to profit. By this time, other police officers had joined the case when there was every reason to believe that Kimberly had been kidnapped, with the purpose of finding the white Honda car. Police officers began checking scrap metal collection points and all places where the car might have been taken for parts or sale. However, it was all in vain. The car seemed to have disappeared. To get additional help in the investigation, Thomas turned to his lawyers, as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In fact, besides the white Honda, there were very few landmarks. Thanks to her friend Lise, they were able to establish what clothes the missing person was wearing. Based on her words, a portrait was created, with which it was supposed to notify citizens of the city and find out information. Detectives also knew that Kimberly had 2 tattoos. One of them represented an infinity sign with a naked couple inside. The second tattoo was a scorpion, her zodiac sign, Zodiac. After this, the police decided to get access to the girl's mobile phone. For this, they came to her apartment. There was a landline phone here, from which 65 calls were made on the morning of the disappearance. However, what shocked the officers wasn't even this, but the fact that Kimberly's apartment wasn't empty. In fact, she was hosting guests, practically an entire family. Here lived her friend April, her boyfriend Joshua Torres, and their 2-year-old child together. The family admitted that during this period, the floors in their apartment were being renovated. They didn't know where to live during the renovation, but Kimberly offered a warm welcome, providing a spare bedroom. As it turned out, they had already lived here for a couple of weeks before the investigators arrived. The members of this family were also concerned about the disappearance of the apartment owner. They said they hadn't heard from her since that very evening when Kimberly went to the party. All this looked very strange. The father of the missing girl knew about the friend's family whom his daughter had sheltered, and was always against this idea. But Kimberly didn't listen to him. She was accommodating and couldn't leave her friend in trouble. Naturally, the couple Joshua and April were interrogated first. Investigators wanted to know why such a large number of calls were made on the morning of the apartment owner's disappearance. Joshua claimed that he started calling all of Kimberly's friends and acquaintances when the girl didn't come home on time. According to him, the student was like a younger sister to him, so he looked after the girl and was worried about her disappearance. Kimberly's mother was informed about what happened literally on the second day after her daughter's disappearance. She immediately flew in from Florida. The woman stayed in Kimberly's apartment, and the cohabiting family was asked to move out. They continued to be considered suspects. The missing girl's mother participated in the search for her daughter. At some point, a friend advised her to consult a psychic who could tell more about the girl's probable fate. In desperation, she clung to this idea. When the woman came to the clairvoyant, she showed photographs of her daughter and asked for help. The psychic said that Kimberly was still alive but in serious danger, so they couldn't delay the search. According to her, the missing girl was weak and dehydrated, and also very cold. The clairvoyant reported that Kimberly was kidnapped by people she knew. The girl tried to escape from captivity, but she was caught again and tied up. The psychic repeated over and over that she saw the letter J in the name of one of the culprits, apparently the main one responsible for what was happening. She considered the kidnapper to be a young man whose name began with this letter. The mother of the missing girl passed this information to the police. In fact, this was the only information that the detectives had at that moment, and they decided to use this lead. Referring to the psychic, they decided to publish this information. The very next day, it was broadcast everywhere in New York news and caused a stir in society, and soon there was a new turn in the case. On March 4th, on 86th Avenue, Woodhaven in Queens around 2 o'clock in the morning, a massive fire broke out. Later, one of the eyewitnesses of what happened said that shortly before the fire, he was walking his dog. She behaved very nervously near this house and barked at it for a long time, although everything looked calm in the territory. This was an ordinary abandoned house, but it was large, and therefore the fire attracted attention and required several fire crews to fight the flames. When finally the fire was extinguished, police firefighters began searching through the ashes. It looked like no one really lived here, however. An unpleasant discovery awaited them in the basement. Below was a burned body, and the remains were so badly burned that even determining the gender was difficult. Presumably it was a woman who had long dark hair left. However, the most terrifying thing was that she was tied to a chair. Medical examiners confirmed that the deceased had her hands and feet bound. She was without shoes, and her hands remained tied behind her back even after death. So, this was clearly murder. It was established that she was alive at the start of the fire. Her lungs were filled with smoke, meaning she was burned alive. During the investigation, it was discovered that some perpetrator doused the house premises with flammable liquid, after which they set it on fire. Due to the poor condition of the body, it was difficult to identify the victim. Police suspected that the burned person was the missing Kimberly. Dental records were needed to identify the body. To obtain them, the detective contacted the father of the missing girl and voiced his assumptions. During the examination of the remains, medical examiners were able to find tattoos identical to those described on Kimberly, and dental records were also found to match. All this confirmed the investigators' terrible fears. Police tried to collect fingerprints from the garage where the victim's car should have been, as well as from the fire site. However, forensics were unable to do this. There were simply no traces. They were thoroughly wiped clean, or the kidnapper was wearing gloves. Now it became obvious why the neighbor with the dog kept stopping near this house during the last few days, when the animal was behaving restlessly. Kimberly desperately tried to break free, to call for help. That's why there was noise. The animal heard her, but these sounds were inaccessible to the human ear. Police immediately contacted the owner of the burned house. The owner was shocked by what happened. He had put the house up for sale long ago and hadn't appeared there himself. From time to time, his assistants came here to check the condition of the dwelling. He quickly inspected the doors and windows to make sure everything was in order, and also collected the mail. During these days, while the girl was being held in the basement, he also appeared here. As usual, he inspected the house from the outside, collected letters, payment notice, and then simply left. Being outside due to city noise, he couldn't hear the girl who might have been calling for help at that very moment. All he needed to do was go down to the basement, and he would have immediately noticed something was wrong. Unfortunately, the man didn't do this. Kimberly was one step away from rescue, but this didn't help. Given that all possible evidence burned, the victim's family and police were again forced to turn to a psychic. This time, the woman said she saw 4 people involved in the execution. She again repeated that one of their names began with the letter J. But the clairvoyant's testimony alone was not enough to find the killer. The victim's father announced a reward of $10,000 for any information that would help catch the criminal. Police continued the investigation and discovered that on the day of his daughter's disappearance, the father returned home and listened to the answering machine recordings. There were 2 strange calls where there was silence on the other end of the line. Later, they played an important role in this case, but for now investigators assumed that it could have been Kimberly trying to contact her father, or the perpetrators could have called him to demand ransom, but something prevented them from doing it. Maybe there were problems with the connection. When the public learned about what happened, this began to provoke numerous rumors. People even accused the murdered girl's father, Thomas, believing that he was responsible for his daughter's death. Some claimed that he was a rich businessman with connections to the local mafia. Police checked this information, despite the businessman's denial. It was proven that he really wasn't connected to crime. Soon, Kim's car was found. The vehicle had been parked on one of the city's quiet streets for several days, quite far from the fire site. Residents didn't know the car was wanted, as no one had officially announced it. But since the car had been abandoned for almost a week, and no one knew the owner of the vehicle, residents raised the alarm. When detectives arrived at the scene, they examined the car's interior and trunk. Here they found Kimberly's second gold earring. Hair and fingerprints were also discovered. However, after this, the investigation stalled for a long 6 months. On September 6, 1995, new witnesses appeared. Men and women contacted the police. The couple stated that their mutual friend had bragged about dealing with Kimberly. They told about 22-year-old Joshua Torres, the same young man whom Kimberly had sheltered along with his family. After this, detectives met with him again and decided to ask a few questions. He began telling a story about how on the morning of Kimberly's disappearance, he called many of her friends. The only one who didn't answer was a Russian guy nicknamed Psycho. He was one of the girl's ex-boyfriends. Joshua claimed that the apartment owner was afraid of him. Additionally, he told police that on the day of the girl's disappearance, he saw a group of suspicious Russians driving through the area where they lived. Learning about this, Thomas decided to continue his investigation. He went to the address where this guy lived to talk to him personally. However, he wasn't there. Instead, the man managed to talk to the young man's neighbors. Everyone insisted that he was quite an unpleasant person who didn't communicate much with others. However, no one could help find him. Only the next day did Thomas encounter the guy and was able to convince him to go to the police station to give testimony. Here, detectives discovered a tattoo on his leg with the abbreviation Kim, which was presumably done during his relationship with the crime victim. However, the young man denied this, referring to the tattoo being dedicated to his close childhood friend. After a brief interrogation, detectives didn't notice anything unusual. The guy claimed he wasn't involved in Kimberly's murder, and he had a solid alibi that was confirmed. Investigators were convinced he had nothing to do with the crime. Police officers analyzed calls made from Kimberly's house on the morning when she disappeared. It turned out that Joshua had lied. He claimed he was calling her friends and acquaintances, but it turned out that most of the numbers belonged to random women. Then detectives requested access to the young man's pager. During that period in the USA, they were widely used instead of mobile phones. It turned out that on that fateful morning, Joshua sent several suspicious messages while in the missing girl's apartment. The guy claimed he was just keeping in touch with friends and gave several evasive comments. Joshua's behavior raised more and more suspicions. By the way, his name began with the letter J. It was this letter that the psychic, whom the deceased's mother had consulted, constantly mentioned. Studying more information about him, investigators established that the young man didn't work. He lived off his partner's money and took care of the child while she worked. All this made him an ideal candidate for the role of kidnapper. He could calmly plan the crime in his free time, track the victim, and take her to an abandoned house to demand ransom. However, something went wrong, and the criminal was forced to hastily destroy all evidence, along with Kimberly. Detectives told Joshua that they didn't consider Kim's former Russian boyfriend a suspect in this case. They pressured him, and the guy started talking. Joshua immediately began telling a new story. He suspected that his friends might have been involved in what happened. 3 men were involved in the case, who caught the girl in the parking lot and put her in the trunk. The first was Julio Negrin. Acquaintances confirmed that he had dated Kimberly for some time and even wanted to marry her. However, the girl wasn't interested in such a relationship, and the couple broke up. Under police pressure, he admitted guilt and complicity in the kidnapping. According to him, he didn't know they were going to kill the girl. The kidnappers only wanted to get ransom as they needed money and intended to release the victim. But the plan didn't work. Police suspicion was confirmed quite quickly. The suspect's partner April remembered that on the day when the girl was reported missing, Joshua was watching television with his friends. When the news about a suspect with the first letter J in the name began broadcasting, one of them stood up and hastily left, calling others to follow him. This person was 19-year-old Nicholas Liberty, who had the nickname J. Later that same day, the missing girl's body was found in the basement of the burned house. Could the kidnappers have been scared by the publicity and burned the girl to leave no traces? Also in this company was 26-year-old Hasi Nagron, who was not related to Julio despite having the same surname. All suspects in the case were Joshua's friends. Each had dark pages in their past related to criminal episodes. However, these were minor offenses that pale in comparison to the scale of cruelty shown towards Kimberly. It was established that Nicholas Liberty was released on bail before the kidnapping. He was still under police surveillance. The day before the execution of the girl, he broke into a friend's house and tried to rob his mother at gunpoint. Instead of a 25-year sentence that such a crime usually carries, he got away with a $1,000 fine. All thanks to his mother, who hired a good lawyer for her son. Apparently, after this, Nicholas was emboldened by impunity and therefore decided to implement a more profitable scheme: kidnapping a businessman's daughter. Police established that Joshua was the initiator of this crime. He decided they could kidnap his girlfriend's wealthy friend and ask her father for ransom. The guy monitored Kimberly's movements and warned his accomplices when she was supposed to return from the party. It turned out that Joshua had quite a turbulent criminal past. Since age 17, he had kidnapped children, but was quickly caught and arrested. However, due to his young age and the complexity of the case, he only received 5 years of probation. Later, Joshua was arrested for sexual assault of a minor, but only served 60 days for this. A year later, he was imprisoned again for 18 months. This time for illegal possession of firearms. It appeared that he formed a real gang with his friends, whose members were called Mutts. Unfortunately, after talking with the police, the gang leader Joshua disappeared. Police officers decided to talk to Joshua's partner named April. As it turned out, he used his girlfriend as an alibi. The guy coordinated the criminal's actions while being at home. In fact, the criminal kidnapped a friend behind his lover's back, but she didn't even suspect it. Thanks to pager messages and criminal testimonies, police managed to find out their criminal plan in detail. It also became known that they were following the girl even at the party. There they behaved calmly, inconspicuously, and just waited for her to leave for home and immediately followed her. 4 kidnappers were identified, but by this time one of the execution participants, Hasi, was dead. On June 23rd, 3 months after Kimberly's death, he was attacked on the street while walking with a child in his arms. He was shot in the back of the head from behind. No one saw the moment of execution, but there were reasons to believe that this was how Joshua silenced his accomplice. He knew that Hasi was experiencing remorse and wanted to turn himself into the police. The remaining 3 were arrested and charged with murder, arson, kidnapping, and holding a person against their will. Later, they were made to talk and compile a complete picture of what happened. In the garage where they went after the party and waited for Kim, the criminals used a gun and tape. The girl resisted when they attacked her. She kicked and scratched the perpetrators, even broke her nails. However, the forces were unequal, and she was bound with tape, including covering her mouth, eyes, and even ears. Then, completely immobilized, they threw her in the trunk. The perpetrators brought the victim to an abandoned house, took her down to the basement and tied her to a chair. They removed her shoes so she couldn't attract attention to herself. They told her that her father owed money, and then left Kimberly there for the next 3 days. The gang leader appointed Julio to go to the house and look after the girl, feed her, and give her water. However, he was afraid of being caught by the police, so he didn't do this. As a result, the girl didn't drink or eat, was very cold, and begged for help. Immediately after they brought her to the abandoned house, the criminals informed Joshua that everything was ready. After this, he made an audio recording demanding $75,000 as ransom. Joshua called Kim's father and played this recording for the answering machine but didn't get the right time interval, so silence was recorded. Just in case, Joshua made another call, but similarly missed the timing of the recorded ransom demand, and again, silence was recorded. Therefore, no one heard the ransom demands, and didn't know that the criminals were waiting for money. Kim could barely breathe through the taped mouth. She constantly lost consciousness, but was still fighting for her life. Meanwhile, the kidnappers waited for news from the victim's father. They didn't even understand that he hadn't received their messages. Instead of checking if everything was going according to plan, they got angry. The perpetrators never received the ransom, so they decided to release the girl. They came to the basement but found her showing no signs of life. Later, medical examiners found out that wasn't the case. She was just unconscious, due to body overload, cold, lack of food and drink. She was very cold during those days when no one watched over her or fed her. Even before this, they were planning to burn the house to cover their tracks. But now the decision was made to set it on fire, along with the hostage to hide the evidence. The public called this crime the most cruel in the history of Queens. There were calls for the death penalty, but it was prohibited in the state. The most controversial figure in the case was Joshua. He didn't directly participate in the execution, although he coordinated the actions of other gang members. His girlfriend April testified against him in court. According to her, he personally confessed to her about what happened, and then beat her to force her to keep quiet. Then he went on the run, and police had to resort to trickery to lure out the criminal. For this, they also used April. During interrogation, Joshua said that he didn't participate in Kim's execution and wasn't involved in it, and the guilty ones were the other participants who were his friends. When Julio learned about this, he decided to cooperate with the investigation and told everything. He repeated his words in court, which allowed Joshua to be found guilty on several counts. Except for murder, he was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Nicholas received the same sentence and went to prison for 58 years. Julio, who was found guilty only of complicity, was sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison. On another birthday of his daughter, which was after the completion of the trial, her father Thomas came to the grave to tell Kimberly that he finally managed to punish the guilty ones. Kim's father struggled with the bitterness of loss until the end, but in 2005 died of cancer. Many remained convinced that the cruel crime undermined the loving father's health. Nicholas was subjected to abuse and attacks in prison. 2 years after the start of his imprisonment, he died of AIDS. Julio served his sentence and was released after 2 years. Joshua will be able to get out of prison only in 2053. Share your opinion in the comments, support the video with a like, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. See you soon.